Welcome to the One Small Change. I am thrilled, as always, that you are sharing this journey of exploration and transformation with me. And I'm your host, Yvonne McCoy, and I bring almost 30 years of entrepreneurial experience and a passion for discovering growth through the power of seemingly small change. And every week, I try to bring you somebody who's got something to share with you to help you along with this journey. And this week, we are talking to Lindsay Phillips. Lindsay, I am so glad that you took time out of your schedule to come and visit with us and to help my audience. So you and I had an amazing conversation. So
Yeah.
I know we will not have a problem talking today. So
Nope.
so tell me, what was the thing that got you doing what you do and now helps you to do it better? So tell us what you do and why you're great
You
at it.
bet. Thank you for having me on. Um, so I've been in the podcasting space for probably about 10 years now, hosting, helping other people launch. And now I really focus on guests and helping them have conversations that convert, repurposing their content. Because back in the day when I was guesting on shows and, helping my clients, I realized that I wasn't getting the results that I wanted. I was getting, the show was live, woohoo. And the hosts were like promoting it in the weirdest way. They didn't have show notes. I just felt like I wasn't being positioned in a way that I wanted to showcase my authority. And I felt like I had no control. Even in the conversations, sometimes hosts ask you really random questions that have nothing to do with your expertise or about a specific topic. And so you feel like the conversation's all over the place and you have no control over the results that you're getting from guesting on podcasts. And so I'm like, there has to be a way I can change this. And so with research and what have you, and testing, I realized some of the mistakes. And so now I'm able to take more control over the podcast interview and the way I leverage it and repurpose it once it goes live so that I am in control of how I'm positioned. I can use it to generate leads and clients, and I'm not relying on the host, that I can actually control it from my end. And that was huge, not only for me, but for my clients.
And you know what the thing that's funny about that is, sometimes it's just a question that changes everything. And it's like, what if this wasn't true? What if it wasn't true that I had no control?
Mm,
And that's the question I've been asking people to ask themselves when they're doing something. And when somebody says, "Oh, it's always like this," or "It has to be like this," and say to them, "What if it isn't true? What if you could do it differently?" And that
exactly.
spark a whole lot of other things. And I have to tell you, what you're doing is so needed. I think I did over 20 podcast interviews and had a really good time, I might add, before I realized that there was really a method to my, that I should be doing and it wasn't until I interviewed somebody and she kept saying, "Well, this is exactly, why I put this in my program." And so her offer actually made sense. The thing that
Yes.
where I was just like, "Oh, whatever you want to ask me. I'm chatty Cathy." So tell us a little bit about how we can do that, or what we should think about when we're thinking about being on a podcast, or what we're going to use it for.
Yeah, 100%. And you hit the nail on the head there. And that is, what are you using the guesting for? Why are you guesting on your show, on different shows? For most entrepreneurs, it's getting obviously exposure, visibility, getting their authority out, but it's also about attracting leads and attracting clients. And so the first point is realizing the goal of the interview and the goal of the conversation, because it's more than just exposure. And so the way I think about it is that the conversation is a bridge between the audience's pain or what they're struggling with or what they aspire to and your offers. So I feel like a lot of guests really skip that mindset part of it. And they're just simply talking about a topic, talking about tips and information that they know, but it's not relating to the audience. They're not feeling understood. They're not being hooked in, going, oh, yeah, that's totally me. Totally always happens to me. When I guest on podcasts, conversations are all over the place, and I feel deflated by the end of it. And then also thinking about what are your offers? What topic, and obviously your call to action, is going to naturally segue to your offers. So it's almost like you're taking the audience along this journey, and I call it the bridge to profits. So like going from, the interview topic, like hooking hooking the listener in through the topic so they know what the episode's about, and then bringing them on that journey, with your talking points, with your stories, with your sound bites, with the information that you're giving in a very strategic way, so that once you get to the offer, they not only understand what you do, but also that you solve a problem, and then they see you as the natural solution. So you're more apt to, get a bigger ROI from those episodes if you look at it through that different lens.
Can I, all right, can I take you kind of back to the beginning? And
Yeah,
I mean, because I think the reason you're doing the either being a guest on a podcast and, or you're having a guest, right? So my purpose of having the podcast is that it is a way for me to develop partnerships with people that I think my community would benefit from knowing. And so I want them to, be exposed, because I obviously am not going to know everything about everything. Uh,
yes,
and the things that I'm interested in, I kind of assume that my audience is also interested in. And
totally.
it's a way for you to be able to have some pre-filtered information, that kind of thing. So my first question is, if you've never been a guest on a podcast, what kinds of questions should you ask yourself about one, your intention, and whose podcast you should go on?
That's a big question.
Sorry.
Because there's so much to unpack there.
Well, give us,
So,
the big.
but yeah, I mean, you have to start somewhere, right? Um, so it first it's thinking about, why do you want a guest on a podcast? Is it because you want to sell more books and you have a book? Is it because, like you said, make those connections with potential collaboration partners? Maybe you want them as a client, maybe you want their clients as your clients because you've got parallel businesses. Maybe it is to get leads. Maybe it's to build your authority so that eventually you can have your own podcast, speak on stage. So there's so many different goals. And so how you go about it will be slightly different. I mean, most of a lot of the guests that are on shows are doing it to build their authority, and yes, visibility and all those little things, but especially those that are hiring podcast booking agencies, like they're really investing in the whole strategy behind podcast guesting. So most of them, their goal is to get leads and clients. And so how you view that conversation is like, it's one thing just to like, oh, I want exposure, and they'll find me and they'll go to my website and then they'll reach out. That doesn't often happen, but you want more than exposure. If you really do want leads and clients, then you do need to be more strategic about that conversation so that you have the end in mind, like your offers, but you're also taking into consideration the audience and what they want and connecting and compelling them, but then also giving them value, but giving that value in a way that showcases your authority, showcases that, like, positions you as an expert. They can understand your framework, how you work with people, the results that you get. Like, it feels like you got to pack a lot in, but it's just like nuances, right? Of like how you talk about your craft and how you seed your programs and the results and all those things.
Well, I think all right. So this is from somebody who made a lot of mistakes. Um, I think that you get better results if when you look, I mean, because I think we all, it's like if somebody says, come on my podcast, we all want to say yes.
Hmm.
And I have done that.
Oh, same.
Gone on podcasts that I had no expertise in, whatever, do you know? I remember I went on one on parenting, and I have no offer that leads to parenting, right?
Yeah.
Um, and the only kind of twist that I had was about the difficulties of parenting while you're building a business,
Mm,
and so it did relate a little bit in the end, but if it was like there were three places to pick from, that probably would have not been my first choice. And I
exactly.
save yourself a lot. I mean, not, I think if you go on a podcast that's not really your audience, you do get experience and you do get better. But at the same token, I think it's better to say, okay, what have I got that, is there something that I have that's of value to this person's audience?
Hmm.
Something that they may find me of value? Because I think one of the other things that's so important is that you make the host or the guest look really good. I mean, you and I had a short conversation and clicked immediately. I mean, it was wonderful. I was like, come on my podcast. This is going to be great. And I had no reservations that you wouldn't, do something and set my people on fire. So I think that's important too, that you feel,
The energy between the two people, 100%.
because if you are standoffish with the person, then that's not really going to get them much traction, I don't think. All right, so that's one thing. It's like not every podcast is equal for your purpose, so you really
Yes.
know what your purpose is. Um, the other thing that we hit on is that you kind of need to reverse engineer your offer into your talk, which is true whether you're on a podcast or any talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
And believe me, I went to a 3-day workshop. I already had my talk and everything, and it wasn't converting. The first thing she said is, we reverse engineer this. We look at what your offer is and make sure that it comes out in your talk. And I was like, oh my God, this offer has nothing to do with it was so. Talk a little bit about, I don't like it when people say that are kind of salesy and say, well, this is why I do this in my program, or my program will take you through these 5 steps, or,
Mhm.
kind of thing. But you still need to let people know what it is that you do and what you deliver. So do you have any suggestions about that?
Absolutely. And that's part of the problem why I think a lot of guests hold back. They don't share how they work with people. They don't share their programs or stories because they're just too afraid of being like really salesy. But if you share it in a way where you're sharing a story, um I'm trying to think of like for me as an example, when I actually booked a podcast booking agency, I was super excited. I'm going to get more exposure, get on the right shows. Woohoo. And then there was literally crickets. I was not getting booked on shows. And I'm like, what is taking so long? And they're like, we're not getting any yeses. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like feeling frustrated. And then I, changed my title, I changed my topic, I did this strategy. And now I teach my clients in the conversations that convert how to do that so they can get booked on shows. So that was kind of a poor example, but you can just kind of like weave it into a story, or like when Jennifer went through my program, I helped her change her title. Once she changed her topic, then she started to get booked on so many more podcasts right off the bat. So you just kind of like weave it into a story.
Well, the thing is, I can't help but go to the example that you use because sometimes the title, it's not the talk, it's not the topic, it's the title, which is what people see first.
Uh-huh.
And the thing is, I'm a big believer in repurposing. Um, and I had a freebie, and I think it says 5 steps to gaining productivity immediately, and was in a giveaway, and it got absolutely nothing. And so, someone said to me, "But you're trying to help people get clients. So why don't you put, you know,
Hmm.
immediately?" It's like, oh, makes so much sense. How come I didn't think of that? Because you can't do it alone, right?
You
Um,
can't see the label inside the jar, as they say.
or the picture if you're in the frame. You can't see the frame if you're in the picture. So, the thing, I guess part of what I'm trying to say is whether you're speaking on a podcast or any place, whether that's networking or whatever, you're whatever you're saying has got to relate to whatever the offer and stuff is.
Yes.
And so you've got the basic material, I think, to speak on a podcast, to do, a 5-minute talk at something, to speak on a summit. You've got the beginning of that. And you can take it and tailor it to the situation that you're in. So podcasting is, if you see speaking as a strategy, podcasting is such a natural
Yeah.
to that. Um, so is there an easy way to find um, places to speak?
To guest on podcasts or to speak?
Guess some
Or yeah.
podcasts.
There's a ton of different options. I mean, obviously you can do your own legwork and research and, email, message on LinkedIn, whatever. The fastest path, I think, is working with either a podcast booking agency who's really going to look at your business, your avatar, your strategies, and then find very specific shows that have that perfect audience. And they do all the legwork and they do all the heavy lifting. And there's a quite a few out there. And the other option is it's almost like a podcast dating service. One is like talks.co. Podmatch is one of my favorites, and they've got a great community. And so some of them will actually match you up with podcasts that you can guest on. And then because you're within the app, you're more likely to get read because they're going to see their inbox versus if you email them cold through email, like they just get dropped, right? But if you're being matched up with people that are looking for what your information that you're sharing, your expertise, and so you're more likely to get yeses, and then it just their algorithms and all that stuff, it just makes it so much easier to find shows.
Probably one of the easiest ways to become a guest is to have your own podcast.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's like, oh, let's do a podcast swap.
Yeah.
And typically what you find is people are a little bit, you've actually made a personal connection with them. And so you're, you don't, it doesn't require as much legwork. And I think the
No.
guests that you get is so much better because
Yeah.
you only invite people that you have a rapport with. So,
Yeah.
I think that is really, really important. Um, Let me ask you about, um, so we talked about, there are lots of ways that you need to have intention before you just go out into the podcast world. You need to know what your offer is so that you can weave it in without sounding salesy.
Hmm.
What else? What else is and we talked about changing the title so that it makes sense, right? Um, is there one other like mistake that people make all the time?
The biggest one I find is relying on the one sheet to help guide the host in that conversation. If you look at most one sheets, they will have like 3 or 4 topics. And then on the bottom, they'll have maybe 7 or 10 questions, but the questions are kind of a mix. of like those 3 or 4 topics, or like about your journey, or like whatever. So when the host, has you on the show, their default is to grab that one sheet and just ask all of those questions. And plus, they don't know your expertise, they don't know what your offers are. So they can have a tendency to ask really random questions. So you don't have a chance to, share your podcast leverage system and your 4 steps to do XYZ, and what the problem is. And so, what I recommend is creating what I call your interview GPS. It's crafting those interview questions ahead of time to help guide the host. And I'm not saying it needs to be like a scripted thing. You know that the host isn't going to like question number 1 and like question number 2. They're not going to go down that list perfectly, but giving them a topic, even if they don't have that question in their form, you can email and say, hey, I know we agreed upon this topic. Here's some interview questions to make sure that I deliver the most value to your audience. And if those interview questions are mapped out a certain way, the host will see like, oh, they're going to touch upon the pain points. Oh, they're going to talk about 3 ways to blah, blah, blah. And so in their head, if you've already spoken about 1 or 2 of those things, it's just like humans like to have closed loops, right? They know in their head that you have 3 steps to share. So they don't want to steer you in the wrong direction so you aren't able to share all of those 3 steps. And there's techniques to like bring the host back and like, oh, before I answer that, I want to make sure I cover this just to make sure your audience fully understands. And so by again using those interview questions as a guide for the host, but also for you to create that structure to the conversation so that you do have the opportunities to talk about your methods, your results, your tips, whatever it is. That I think is like, that took me a while to like clue into. And as soon as I made that change, and then also I have my clients, we changed up their interview questions. And oh man, the interviews were so different. And I create reels from interviews for my clients because I repurpose it. And so it was so much easier for me to like get content, get those reels. Um, the whole episode actually has a direction and a theme and a title that's not like this, that, and the other. That was a game changer.
And I think you said something, but it was very subtle. And that is, you can course correct while you're in the interview if you are feel comfortable with your material and stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm one of these people that I can ad lib about almost anything, I think. Um, but I think there are times when you want to say, you know what, that's a good question. But before I answer that, I think, to make sure that your audience really gets value, I need to
Hmm.
tell you this,
Yeah.
and so you still have some, um,
Control.
thank you. That was,
Right? Like that. Yeah. It's
I was going to say authority or something, but I think, the other thing is, I think that there's nothing worse as a podcast host when the person gives these really short answers and you're like, well, tell me more about that, and you're just like, come on.
oh,
It's like we had this great conversation before, and now you're killing me, right?
it's like pulling teeth.
Yeah. So it's like, your client, your host will tell you about, there are things, well, that I say, for instance, I'll say, oh my God, I wish we could talk about this more, but we really need to move on because I want you to talk about your gift, right? I would much rather say that and leave the audience wanting,
Yeah.
well, this has been great.
I've had some of those awkward conversations.
Oh, well, anyhow,
Yeah.
so tell us about your free gift.
I'd be happy to. That's a great segue. Yeah, I mean, we've obviously talked about how to regain that control back as a guest so that you can create conversations that convert. And often, like I kind of alluded to at the beginning, is that some of it is a mind shift of some of those things. Like, oh, I want to have an organic conversation. It's like, you want a structured conversation that converts. And so I have a guide that's crickets to clients, and it's 5 shifts to turn podcast interviews into real results. So it kind of goes into those in a little bit more depth so that you understand the strategies that are possible so that you can get better results from your guesting. And so they can get that at smoothbusinessgrowth.com/change for your podcast, of course, and your audience. And yeah, they can grab it there.
That's fantastic. There is one other thing that I did want to ask you though, and that is, excuse me, I got crickets. And have you found any interesting ways to use podcasts? I mean, one of the things that I do with my podcast episodes is if I'm doing something with somebody else that's been on my podcast, I will put their podcast episode in there.
Yeah.
Because it's like because I do this thing with people's events, I might not be able to come to the event, but you might want to know more about that person. So that's one way that I'm using my podcast. Do you have any other ways that, you already talked about making clips and stuff like that?
Mhm.
Um, Anything else?
Yeah, and I believe too that for guests, and this is obviously for hosts as well, it's not just enough to post about the episode, it's gone live, and then as a guest rely on the host to do all the heavy lifting and the promotion. Like, woohoo! I tapped into their audience. I'm good to go. It's like, no, repurpose, create a blog post, get the raw video, put it in YouTube, pull out little tips and, email your list those tips, pulling out reels and YouTube shorts, make carousels. I mean, there's so many ways that you can reuse that content, and don't be afraid to use it for your own gain, right? Like, obviously you want to push to the show, but that's your content, it's your expertise. Like, don't be afraid to push to your own lead magnet, or say, hey, this is how I work with people, hit me up if you want to get on a call. So it's thinking about the content also as a bridge between the client's needs and your offers. So it's like, how can you connect one to the other? So that's kind of like how my brain always works.
And I think that's a great way to work. So, all right, let me challenge your brain for a minute. When was the last time you did something new for the first time?
Using AI. And lately, I've been looking into creating my own prompt and app. And so I've been delving into that. And it's like, it feels scary because it's like, I'm no tech wizard. But it's like, it's so exciting at the same time just to understand what's possible. So I've been kind of diving into that lately, which is kind of cool.
I have to say, I am a non-techie person, and I have fallen in love with AI. And it's especially when you train it.
Hmm.
And so, one of the things that I do is I have models. So I will dump my models in and repurpose something and say, how can I make this better based on what I'm now talking about? And
Yeah.
and it is a lifesaver. And the title, like we said, your freebie or the talk of your title can be everything. And so it can really generate a whole lot of stuff. All right.
Yeah.
So the commercial. Um, so I hope that you've gotten some good information. And what I would really like you to do is subscribe and share and engage with this podcast on social media. And the reason that I do it is I want to help you connect to other people that can help your business grow. And it's my way of trying to give back to this community so that you can, have growth and impact. And so I hope that you will continue to join me on the One Small Change so that we can really see what kind of shifts we can make that's going to, yield monumental transformation. And if you haven't seen my first episode of why I'm doing that, you might want to do that, as well as the quarterly clarity check-in, where I get to talk
Mhm.
all by myself,
Love it.
not talk over my guests. So, unfortunately, our time is up.
It
We
goes by fast.
Oh, it
We
does
packed a lot in.
when we're having fun. And so, make sure you guys take a look at the freebie that she's given you, because if you're interested in podcasting at all, it is going to help you. And so, Lindsay, you've shared a lot, but can you give us some last words of wisdom or something to grow on?
I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome and that holds people back from guesting on podcasts. Who's going to listen to me? But it's like, just think about the one client that you've helped, or even if one person listens and your tips have been super useful and help them move forward in their business. It's like, don't worry about what everyone's going to think. Don't worry that it's been, the first time that you've guested on a podcast. Everyone's got to start somewhere. You've got a message to share, share it.
Exactly. I believe in that immensely. Um, So, guys, we got to go. Remember, change is simple, but it's not always easy. And it requires courage and resilience and a willingness to step outside your comfort zone. So, don't be afraid to look silly on a podcast, because you probably are better than you think. So, I hope you will join me for the one small change as we go forward. Until the next time, stay curious. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.